Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Fuhrman and racing analyst Chris Wormy.
The rain is finally stopped. We got the Coke 600 in over the holiday weekend, and we shift our attention to Gateway, where the NASCAR Cup Series will head for the second straight year with a new Aero package. But more on that as we get deeper into the heart of the podcast. Welcome into a fresh episode of Stay Green, a Bet the Board production, part of the Wondery Podcast Network. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by professional bettor and racing analyst Chris Wormy. And Wormser, the biggest question I have for you, have you finally dried out from a rather wet weekend at Charlotte Motor Speedway?
Oh, man. Kind of a nightmare weekend to be at the track. It's kind of crazy. I now understand like people's frustration at the track and how much or how little information they actually give you. Because, if you're 30 minutes away, which is about where we're staying relative to the track, like, do we leave? Do we not leave? I was relying on people at the track to let me know whether it was raining or not, because it's almost like you hear nothing. And like, it was very frustrating. So when I went on Sunday, I was like, I am going to tweet out everything. If it's misting, I'm going to let people know that it's misting. And if there's blue sky or if it's getting lighter. So I did turn into, I felt like a little bit of a weather journalist there for a few hours. But even then, like, we were just at a bar kind of close to the track. We missed the opening ceremonies. So, you just never know. You just never know until you're there. So it was a very confusing week, back and forth from the track and back to the hotel. But all in all, NASCAR was great to me to visit, the NASCAR Hall of Fame, a place I'd never been to. And then also to see some of the race shops was pretty cool. So I have a great appreciation for the amount of work that goes into these cars. Not that I didn't have it before, but to actually see it really does change the way you think about the sport.
The one question I texted you in the wake of Sunday's race, basically finishing on time. We know the 600 is an absolute marathon. You can share this with our loyal Stay Green audience. I go, Worm, did you have it in you to stay for the culmination of the Xfinity race that was postponed for rain? And your response was?
Fuck no.
So Allgaier, he goes out there and wins. Apparently you didn't have enough left in your tank to stay out there to watch Allgaier grab the checkered flag a few minutes before midnight. I can't imagine there were a lot of people out there that actually saw it, given how sparse the crowd was. But when you look at some of the viewership numbers on TV, not a major drop-off whatsoever. And I guess if you have to put a race on Monday, better it's on a holiday weekend. The unfortunate reality for the true racing fan, we love to see the 600 because of all the track changes that go on, where it starts in the heat of the day, things cool off, and you see a lot of comers and goers. But I will say one thing, having watched the live odds from start to finish for that race, it was about as eye-opening as anything else, albeit Ryan Blaney able to grab the checkered flag and break a long 59 race losing streak, but we'll get to that in a moment. For all those folks new to the Stay Green podcast, we try and divide things up around these parts. Stage one, a brief recap of what we saw last weekend and how we can take some of those learnings and apply them going forward. Stage two, we focus a little bit more on big betting basics. This week, we'll have a peel back of the curtain, so to speak, for how we assess what we've seen so far this season. The regular season more than halfway done, and where there may or may not be some opportunity in assessing season-long futures as we grow our portfolio there. And of course, stage three, arguably the most important. What are the most actionable elements as we preview the upcoming race weekend, this time from Madison, Illinois, for the Enjoy Illinois 300, or whatever the heck they're calling it these days. And want to have you follow Chris on Twitter at ChrisWormy15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. So, Worm, we also not only had on-track activities, we had plenty of other NASCAR drama that probably provides the best way for us to start. And as we record here on a Wednesday night, we had a major penalty handed out. So I think that becomes the most logical jumping off point for the 14 car of Chase Briscoe. I believe you got a tour of SHR's facility when you were in Charlotte, so I single-handedly hold you accountable for them getting docked a slew of points and now a monumental hill they have to climb if the 14 is going to make themselves eligible for the chase.
Yeah, I'm the guy that swapped out that part. Like,
hey,
someone just looked away and I ran over and swapped out that part. So
that's an aggressive move, and you will not be welcome back at SHR or Spab Shop ever again.
Yeah, man, what a penalty. I mean, someone blatantly just decided to, I don't know. I don't know how this happens. I understand like an L1 penalty where you just kind of modify a part, but to just use a completely different part, man, I don't know how that happens. And by the way, it wasn't helping. I mean, this car is barely a lead lap car. So, I mean, if you're going to cheat, do it big, I guess. When I read that penalty, I was like, wait, what is going on? But all that changes with that 14 team is they have to win to get into the playoffs. I mean, this was a team that last year almost made their way into the Final Four and also had a good run at Phoenix, obviously winning there early in the year, and then, kind of rolling right around the top 5 all day. So this is a team where if they had really kind of figured it out, they would have had a chance to kind of work their way through the playoffs, but not anymore. They have to win. And with the speed that they have in their race cars, I do not see that happening anytime soon.
It definitely becomes an uphill battle for Chase Briscoe and company. It does lead you to wonder what exactly transpired. The one thing to NASCAR's credit when we talk about how in flux some of the rules are and how fickle some of these appeals have been in the grand scheme of things, the one area where they have remained most consistent, that if you're going to tinker with stock parts, they're going to try and throw the book at you. And apparently that's what they decided to do to establish a precedent that I'm sure not a lot of other teams are going to break, especially those that already find themselves on the inside of a quest to try and win a championship. So Chase Briscoe, uphill
they're
battle.
Not even going to appeal, Todd. Like, they're just so, like, I don't know how this happens. Like, how do you not like, did they just like Blickensderfer? Like, did they just call him in? Not Blickensderfer. Who's the crew chief for the?
Is it Johnny Klossmeyer still?
Klossmeyer, not Blickensderfer. Yeah. So Klossmeyer, like, did he know? Like, or is this like a meeting? Like, hey, who put this piece on? And like someone just kind of raises their hand, like, oh, I thought that was okay. I just that to me is for Zipadelli to just say, we understand the penalty and we'll accept it. You don't see that very often. So someone made a huge mistake, and I don't think you'll see that happen again. By the way, any team thinking about, maybe replacing a part, maybe don't do that.
Yeah.
Just because
if you're listening to this podcast and you find yourself as a member of HMS, JGR, Trackhouse, RFK, or any of the other prominent racing teams, you're going to want to take Chris's advice, and you may not want to tinker too much with your car in that regard. But obviously that wasn't the only big headline. Maybe NASCAR needed to issue a stiff penalty for Chase Briscoe to bury the real news that we thought we were going to have regarding NASCAR's most popular driver. Going to have the opportunity to watch the race from Gateway, sitting on his couch, most likely, as Chase Elliott was parked, given the right hook he put on Denny Hamlin. Rule 44C lists intentionally wrecking or spinning another vehicle, whether or not that vehicle is removed from competition as a result, as one of the 5 member actions that could result in a penalty. Elton Sawyer had some pretty stern words that he shared on Dave Moody's radio show, and Chase Elliott will not be driving the 9 car. Instead, it'll be Corey LaJoie jumping in to do that. Carson Hocevar jumps into the 7. But Chase Elliott, as if he didn't have enough work cut out for him to try and get into the playoffs, suddenly the idea of pointing his way in becomes that much more difficult.
Yeah, and he's 28th in points right now. There's maybe a little stress there. If you kind of look at the races coming up, I mean, it's a good thing it happened at Gateway. I mean, not that it's a good thing ever, but, if it had been a road course, a place like Sonoma where Chase is typically really good, I mean, he's going to have to win at this point. I mean, maybe not a must win, but he better have some really good runs. So here, when it comes to the suspension, just from a racing perspective, you just can't get someone in the right rear. Like, you can wash them up the track, but you have a car turning directly into the front stretch wall. Yeah, you can't have it. And it was probably a very easy call for NASCAR, especially as vocal as Denny was. I mean, on his podcast and then via Twitter showing the SMT data. I'm pretty sure that everybody knew that he was going to get a penalty. The only people that didn't were just huge Chase fans, and they thought that it was preposterous that you could even consider, having Chase get suspended. But I'll be curious, a little one-off chase break. I wonder how that's going to affect ratings. If it does even a little bit, man, he is very important to the sport. So we'll see what happens.
I still wonder. I mean, look, I don't dive into ratings enough to put things in perspective that way in terms of one driver's presence or absence and what it actually does. There's so much other noise that's there when you look at the time of day for the race, if it's on network TV, if it's on FS1, and all of those other variables. So I'll leave that to smarter people than me. But the bottom line is this: if you want to maintain a competitive balance, and one of the preeminent issues has been safety, you have to rule with an iron fist. You have to remove this from the sport entirely. And Denny Hamlin in his podcast, Actions Detrimental, was pretty outspoken about all of it. And I imagine that he has the ear of NASCAR, not only as one of the sport's most prominent drivers, but obviously as a team owner as well. So no Chase Elliott out there. You see the odds on Corey LaJoie. Probably not a guy that we're going to have in our gambling equation this weekend, but you look at his price at 40-1 or thereabouts. Some interesting numbers being hung on terms of his prospects as a top 10 candidate. We mentioned Ryan Blaney at the top, and this will provide, the last thing that we can hit on as part of stage one. Gave team owner Roger Penske his first same-year sweep of the Indy 500 and the Coke 600 back-to-back. We said he broke a 59-race drought in the process. And when you listen to some of the quotes from Ryan Blaney, I know we had the car to do it, but restarts can be crazy. You start to get to feel like you can't win anymore when you don't win in a while. It kind of gets hard. So just super thankful to the 12 guys for believing in me. Leads a race high and career best 163 of the 400-lap marathon. Obviously, this was a race that saw an inordinate amount of caution, 16 in total for 83 laps. William Byron, the other storyline, he picked up about a zillion spots from that first pit stall. I'm convinced you and I on a bicycle could have done the same thing when we got our wheels swapped out. But in my opinion, the best car ends up winning the race. Congratulations to the 12 of Ryan Blaney.
Yeah, I mean, it was the best car won. And whenever the best car wins, I enjoy it because these guys put so much effort into not only making these race cars, but it's a grind for the whole season, the amount of travel that goes in. So Blaney, I like the way that he drives people. He's a good, clean racer. And to see him have the best car and the chips kind of fall right at the end for him to kind of win on that late restart, no one was going to catch him. So I don't think he was really passed all day under green flag conditions. So I always like it when the best car wins. I'm happy for Ryan Blaney. I'm a little bummed I didn't get any of that 25-1 live, but I'll just blame Charlotte Motor Speedway for not having Wi-Fi, which is also the reason why I left early.
There we go. Got to blame somebody else, not the fact
wasn't my fault
that you're in a state that doesn't actually have legal betting in any capacity.
Yeah, you're right. That's true.
Well, we'll leave that part out of the equation entirely. We can edit that out in post-production, although we don't really edit much around here. So we're advertising to everybody the challenges he has in terms of being able to get down when he's not manning his workstation there. I did not have any exposure to Ryan Blaney in the live market. Felt like I had everybody else that finished inside the top 5, but so is the story of my season. No one wants to listen to us bitch and moan, especially when the best bet that we gave out on last week's show gets home with Kyle Larson finishing 30th, Denny Hamlin finishing 35th, just like we drew it up with two cars priced in the single digits going into the race.
It's hard to win, guys and gals. It's hard to win. So when you catch a break like that, I found myself kind of like when Denny, of course you didn't see it, right? So they kind of just showed his car and I was like, oh yes, Denny's out. But then it was like, ooh, Denny took a lot of damage. So then it went to like, okay, let's see his window net come down because it did take a second. So, we'll take him when we can get him. Kyle Larson, ooh, man, just not what I expected out of that car. I mean,
don't worry. We'll get to the 5, and you can offer up your ridiculous philosophy and theory should you want to try and share that with our listeners. So we'll get to that when we look at some of the odds for Gateway. But this week, we will do everything we can, as always, to make sure that we try and get something on the Bet the Board website for Sunday. But with weather impacting practice and everything else, we had some of the smallest race cars we've had, and we're not just going to put out a bet for bet's sake. Green, white, checkered flag waves on stage 1 and into stage 2. We go when we look at how the season has unfolded. I guess the first question I have for you, Worms, are observations overall. We've seen comers and goers as far as some of the teams. From a consistency standpoint, HMS has shown the most speed since week 1. JGR very much back in the fold, but do we have to pay attention to Fords, given that Ryan Blaney distanced himself from the rest of his compatriots and has kind of been the model of consistency over the last 6 weeks, even if no other Fords appear to be anywhere close?
Yeah, I'm beginning to think that just this Ford speed might be isolated to just the 12. I mean, no one else has really looked that good unless it's been a the 22 stealing some track position to get a decent finish. You haven't really seen much out of Kevin Harvick, so I think that this is kind of isolated to the 12. I can't imagine. I think that if there's another car in that Ford camp that I think does have a little bit of value, who's just been kind of hanging around, is that Brad K. And I think Brad K is not due for a win, but he's putting himself in position week in and week out that if he does get a break or a late restart, he's going to be tough to pass. If Brad K ever gets clean air, I fully expect him to set sail. So I think that's from just a manufacturer perspective. I would, in Ford specifically, I think it's Blaney and then Brad K and then maybe Harvick. But I have just not seen anything else out of the SHR cars and certainly not Logano. So, but when it comes to the Hendrick, like, there's kind of the tale of two teams within there. You have the 5 and the 24 that have been out there fast leading laps. I think that when it comes to championship team, the team that's in championship form is William Byron. He's just so consistent. If you just look at his finishes just the last 5 weeks, it's second, first, third, fourth, seventh. I mean, those are the finishes you need, and he's not making mistakes. He's able to take advantage of, a good pit stall on pit road and just kind of maintain his track position. Right now, the 24 team looks kind of like the 9 team did last year with Chase Elliott, just having these solid finishes, maybe not having the fastest car, but if you're in the top, 4 or 5 with that last restart, something like Darlington could happen and you steal a win. So I like the way that team's operating. I still think that Larson has the most speed, but man, he just can't buy a win at this point, unless it's a non-points paying race. So we'll see what happens with kind of the rest of the season. But to see Larson struggle at Charlotte really was shocking. So we'll have to see where they unload this week, a place where he wasn't particularly great last year, and see if it's just maybe they lost a little bit to the field. I doubt it, but it'll be interesting to see what happens this weekend.
Do you feel the race to the championship is more wide open now, knowing that we have 14 races in the books than what you would have said 4 or 5 weeks ago? Or do you still feel that, hey, look, there are a couple of cars and drivers that you trust a lot more, especially knowing the sequencing of the playoff races as much as anything else? Or quite honestly, you can go, hey, look, we're going to take a wait and see approach. There's no reason to try and make bold, blanket, generalized statements. Given the fact that we're going to go through the hot summer months, we're going to see a lot more stuff get worked out one way or another for some of these teams that may be just off the pace or teams that may have peaked a little bit too early.
Yeah, I don't think that some of these teams have peaked too early. I just think that, I think the biggest thing that I'm looking at is who is able to recover from mistakes and who's able to drive back through the field. And so far, I think that the 5 is driven back through the field the best, so he can recover the most. However, he's just making mistakes late in a race or getting wrecked late in a race or, getting these DNFs. That's where he's struggling. The 11 has worked his way back up through the field a few times, but, William Byron just kind of stays at the front. So I'm not going to rush to make any plays at this point. I still like Larson at 6-1. I think that there's some value there. I think he could rattle off, a couple wins in a row. But I think you have to look at the tracks, and the tracks coming up in the next 10 races. We have 4 road courses. So, that is going to lend, an advantage to some of these road course guys. So I look at a guy like Tyler Reddick at 20-1. He's probably going to be the favorite at Sonoma along with Larson. He could run well this week at Gateway. He ran well last week at Charlotte. I think he's starting to get some decent finishes. He's got 3 top 10s in the last 4 races, starting to race up there with the leaders. So, we're going to go to Sonoma. Chicago is going to be, man, I think that this will be the most similar to like an F1 race where like qualifying means everything. So, and I look for him to qualify well, just like he did at COTA. And then we're going to have the Indianapolis GP, which is, just stay out front and survive, and then followed up with Watkins Glen. So, for the next 10 races, we could see Tyler Reddick win a couple of them, put himself, well inside of that, even the top 5 in points. Right now, he's sitting there 7th. He's already got 1 win. So, you got to like Tyler Reddick at this point in the season. I think he's the only guy that, sitting at 20-1 some places. I think if you're looking to nibble, that would be the guy to look to.
No, it makes a ton of sense. Look, I mean, that's the one thing about the NASCAR regular season. It's 26 races. It's an absolute grind. You add in 10 playoff races there. There are so many ebbs and flows, and you want to make sure that you've had cars that are capable of staying up front, showing race winning speed, and a variety of other factors that all play a prominent role in terms of determining who will ultimately rise to the top of the heap. To your point, though, avoiding mistakes can be as important as anything else. And it's just wild to see. I know we'll talk plenty about track position strategy and some of the things that'll factor into the handicapping for this weekend at Gateway. You can follow Chris on Twitter. That's at ChrisWormy15. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Again, for all things Bet the Board, follow Bet the Board Pod on Twitter as well. Make sure that you download, rate, review, subscribe for everything on our channel. Plenty of great college football content that's out there, sports memorabilia, NASCAR, plenty of ways to put your bankroll to work for you during the dog days of summer. On to stage 3, Worm, and it's the Gateway preview, obviously, at Worldwide Technology Raceway. A total of 300 miles covered in the race, made up of 240 laps. Monkey math on that makes it 1.25 miles per lap. First stage consists of 45 laps, second stage 50 laps, and then we'll have everything else unfold in the next 100 laps to try and do that. I'm breaking down the math here. I'm sure I screwed something up, but it's all right. Nobody's going to hold me accountable.
Good work.
Drivers won't be using the short track package that we saw here last year. Expectations for drivers, probably a little bit of hybrid of things, as we'll have the intermediate track approach, the same thing that we've seen at Las Vegas, Kansas, Charlotte, and other high tire wear venues like Darlington and Dover as well, which are more similar in length, but Gateway lacks some of the banking that those tracks have. So it obviously creates a different level of specificity and complication. Goodyear bringing the same tire combination where it ran here last year, as well as at Phoenix, Richmond, and North Wilkesboro for the All-Star race. Track specs kind of shared some of that, 1.25 miles, asphalt surface, flat corners. Turns 1 and 2 are banked steeper and match the characteristics of New Hampshire, while turns 3 and 4 are less highly banked and much more similar to Phoenix. Minimal banking in these turns, 11 degrees in 1 and 2, 9 degrees in 3 and 4. So I give you all of that to ask you this. When you're looking at Gateway, logical track comps, are there any? Can you lean on the race from last year, a combination of things, or throw all of it out the damn window?
Man, it's going to be a little bit of a combination. I would say the track that I would compare it most to would be Phoenix, with the exception of a guy like Kevin Harvick, and I'll talk about that in a second. Richmond just has so much more tire fall off. There's a lot more grooves. Phoenix is more of a one groove. I think New Hampshire just... It's a little slower track. The turns are a little bit longer. I feel like they're in the corner forever in New Hampshire. So I don't know how you have a tire that you're going to have on which I would consider a smooth, like flat racetrack, and have it be the same tire as this high tire wear track in North Wilkesboro. Like, why can't they bring a softer tire that would wear a little bit more? I think that Goodyear is, it's gotten a little soft on this, and they don't want to take any chances. I understand it's a new track, but for me, I'm going to look a little bit at Phoenix, but I also think that a little bit from last year, just, man. But I think actually current form is what I like the most at this point. I think that I will look at current form more than anything else when handicapping this race.
Hey, I mean, look, that can be the greatest equalizer. We can come in with all the preconceived notions that you normally would for a track that gets thrown out the window after you watch a 20-minute practice session. Weather permitting, we should have that at least unfold. I believe 10 o'clock Eastern is what's scheduled for the Cup cars on Saturday. We know the Xfinity Series out on the West Coast in Portland. The trucks will also be at Gateway this weekend. So if we get into some of the drivers to watch, then we can start at the top of the board. Kyle Larson's number has actually drifted out at some prominent books. Opened the week as an overwhelming favorite in that 9-2 range. I've seen a lot of books drift him out to 5. And you talk about current form. I mean, the last 8 points paying races for Kyle Larson: 30th, 20th, 2nd, 32nd, 33rd, 1st, 35th, 1st. His average finish this year is 18th. That's good enough for 17th best in the Cup Series. I don't even know how you handicap the 5. I mean, I know you had a theory that you joked about before we started recording. You're welcome to try and divulge that, but obviously preface it with, this isn't the best way to go about building.
This is not what I'm recommending. It was just kind of a thought that I threw out there. You should just take Kyle Larson to win the race and then fade him in every matchup. Because if he runs well, like, you only would have like gotten kind of screwed out of both of those would have been at Kansas. Otherwise, he wins the race or he finishes, 25th or worse. So, man, kind of feast or famine with this guy. Yeah. Can Kyle Larson go out there and win this race? Absolutely. Do I think he'll be fast? Yes. Do I think he'll qualify well? Yes. Do I think he'll win? I don't know. Like, I just, he's tough right now. I think with his price isn't going anywhere. Even if he looks really fast in practice, qualifies in the pole, he's not going off at less than 9-2 or 5-1. So always wait on Larson. It'll be interesting. I just hope he doesn't look perfect in practice again, because then it's like hard not to bet him. So, I would like to see him look human this weekend. I think that there are other cars that I think provide a lot more value and potentially have a chance to go out there and win this race.
Well, one of his teammates, obviously, is his greatest competition, at least from a pre-week odds standpoint. That, of course, would be William Byron, the car that finished second last weekend in Charlotte. And that was his 5th straight top 10 at overall this season. When you look at the 24, whether or not he has race-winning speed depends on the week, but he has been the model of consistency. Won at Phoenix, finished terribly at Martinsville and Richmond. When you look at the 24 and the way he's unloaded, I have to imagine it's going to sound like a broken record that you can't see this price moving all that much, even if he unloads with an absolute hot rod.
Yeah, same thing. I mean, you can almost put Larson and Byron in the same bucket. I would say that they're just kind of properly priced. You have to, the books have to protect themselves. They can't throw out an 8 or 9-1. Otherwise, they're just going to get slammed before practice and qualifying. So, raw speed's there. Obviously, he'll qualify well. He didn't run particularly well here last year. So I guess neither did Larson. But, they ran well at Phoenix. It's going to be the same tire. And I think that to most drivers, this track does drive the most similar to Phoenix. So I expect these two guys to be good. But, their price isn't going anywhere. Let's just wait.
And when we go from the favorites, obviously, this is the biggest, bulkiest tier out there. I mean, it's pretty much every other big name driver that finds their odds priced right around that 8 or 9 range, upwards of 18. And we actually have seen some movement at a lot of prominent shops this week on pre-week positions. Joey Logano and his teammate Ryan Blaney, those guys were available at some shops upwards of 14-1. We've seen them fall into the single digit range. We saw Kyle Busch at one shop out here in Vegas open as high as 16-1. His number has basically been cut in half. So we may as well stick in the Ford camp to kick things off. When you look at Blaney, moved up to the second in the overall standings with his first win last weekend. His average lap time was the fastest at Dover in this particular package. Blaney's 118 driver rating in the 2022 Gateway race was ranked second. If not for a pit road mistake, we could have been talking about the 12 having won that particular race. Current form, momentum, we can say what we want. I mean, look, he finally grabs the checkered flag, but as we talked about earlier, 5 top 10s in his last 6 races. So the 12 beginning to gain a little bit of confidence.
Yeah. And I think this I missed this last week. He's been running decent. Now, he just hasn't had race winning speed. He's just kind of been around. And this was the first week where it's like, whoa, that was different. That's different 12 car than we've seen the weeks previous. So, man, his price he got hit hard. And, you go from last week, I was like, I wouldn't touch him at 25-1, to, Blaney can win this week. So, I would rather see him unload fast and hear some driver comments and say, hey, our car is good again this week before I start, investing in Blaney at that 10-1 range. At that point, I mean, 25-1 week in and week out the last like 4 or 5 weeks. And then all of a sudden he wins one race and he's going to be 10-1. I don't think NASCAR works like that, but I'll tell you what, if he does go out there and have a good run, I'll be interested to see where they price him for the rest of the year, because it could provide an opportunity for maybe some other guys to have some elevated prices, or Blaney could go out there and win a race and maybe you get 11 and 12-1 on him. It's good when that 12 car has speed, because he can qualify well. And sometimes he's fade material, even though he qualifies well. So it just provides great betting opportunities seeing him run well. Now, Logano it's like they're attached at the hip here. Why is Logano's price so low? What?
I mean, they have to be running off of what we saw last year, where Logano went off as an overwhelming favorite, but needed a little bit of late race variance to ultimately get the win and beat out Kyle Busch on that overtime restart.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at his last 4 finishes, 30th, 31st, 6th, 18th, 21st, I mean, not the same, and they're priced similarly. And I don't think they should be. Blaney went out there in what's the fastest car. So Logano was not the fastest car, not even close. So for him to be priced like that, I understand that he won.
Thanks for that reminder. I bet against Logano in 3 matchups. He comes home 21st and still goes 2-1 in the 3 matchups where I faded him. So I appreciate that salt in the wound, you son of a bitch.
Bitter party of one. Anyway,
been that way for the last month around these parts, my friend. Let me tell you.
I know. I just don't know why that he's priced this way. At this point, Logano just has not shown me anything. And last year, I remember looking at practice times, and I think I told you this might be the most dominant car we see all year, and he wasn't. He kind of rode around. I think his like average running position was like 8th. Now, he did kind of end up on the proper strategy at the end, and I'll kind of hit on that towards the end here. But to have a 1.25 mile track and have strategy play a role is really hard to fathom. But man, you have got to monitor your tires. If you're going to take right sides one time and there's a caution 20 laps later, you might just take left side. So it's kind of this cat and mouse game, but you have to have the right strategy. Larry Mack came on this podcast, and when I asked him, would you rather have the fastest car or the best strategy? He said, you have to have strategy. It's so hard to pass. So that's how Logano was able to find victory lane last year. You do probably need to be on the first 2 rows in the final restart to make it work. Now, last year, we saw a lot more cautions. So we don't really know what happens on the super long run. We could get 40, 50 laps into a run, and someone might be better. And I think it'd be great to see some tire wear, some fall off, maybe see 1 or 2 seconds of fall off over, 30 or 40 laps. But until we see that, man, you just need to be only concerned with your track position. If I'm the crew chief, I am making sure we have enough fuel to make it to the end of the stage. And I am doing whatever I can to stay up front all weekend.
Speaking of staying up front, a car that did a very good job of that in last year's race was Kyle Busch. And we mentioned his odds getting cut down considerably from 16-1 down to 8 at some books. I have seen him floating around in that 11 or 12 range, led a boatload of laps here last season, got passed by Joey Logano on that restart. His car did consistently get better, though, deeper they got into the race. And when you look at the way that the 8 car has trended, back-to-back top 10 finishes, 3 top 7 finishes in his last 5 races overall. Had a tire issue that ruined his day at Dover, got wrecked on a restart at Kansas. Darlington, he didn't lead a lap, but earned a top 3 driver rating and followed that intermediate track race with a top 5 driver rating in the 400-lap race at Charlotte, despite spending time doing his best Cole Trickle impression, driving backwards to make sure he could get to pit road. Kyle Busch, pre-week number has been beat up a little bit. What are some of the expectations that you have for the 8 this weekend?
I think that he's starting to find a little bit of speed in his car. But man, I don't know that he should be less than 10-1. I mean, 16 certainly had my attention, but we haven't seen him just unload and be super fast. I'd be shocked if he went out there and we saw a price of less than 10-1, before the race, especially when I think Hendrick will qualify so well. So, Kyle Busch is a tremendous talent, and I would not be shocked if he went out there and won. However, I just don't see his price going anywhere. Even if he looks good in practice and qualifying, you look at, even Truex, at Darlington, we had the same conversation. Like, where's his price going to go? He went out there, looked great in practice, qualified on the pole, and we still got him at 7.5-1, and he opened at 7. So I think you could see the same kind of thing with Kyle.
Yeah, it's so interesting because you keep waiting to see him be the model of consistency. And last year in that same car, Tyler Reddick was actually pretty decent at this particular track. So we wonder if Kyle can put it all together and we can start to see him string together some finishes, maybe an inkling of things to come, given what he's done over a 5-race sample size. We haven't talked much about JGR. We may as well here, and odds makers have kind of thrown their hands in the air when it comes to pricing Martin Truex Jr., Denny Hamlin, and Christopher Bell, all widely available in that same price range. We'll call it 10-1 from a consensus standpoint for argument's sake. When we look at Martin Truex Jr., had his 3rd top 5 of the season last weekend. He and Kyle Busch combined to lead 100-plus laps here a season ago. JGR setup was strong last season, and we've seen the speed at intermediate tracks, at least with this package to boot. Denny Hamlin saw his long streak of finishing on the lead lap coming to a screeching halt last weekend. Back-to-back finishes outside the top 10 now. Charlotte incident-driven, just didn't have the speed in his car, though, at Darlington. So that finish, in my opinion, a little bit misleading, coming in 12th. And we look at Christopher Bell, 3 straight finishes of 14th or worse, but I did think his car was significantly better than the 24th that it'll show on the standings board where he finished last weekend at Charlotte. Before that, had compiled a run of 7 top 10 finishes in a 9-race span. And when you look at Christopher Bell, top 10 performance at the track here last year, and this track type is one where he's had success in the past. Yep. When we talk about flat corners, New Hampshire, Phoenix, etc.
Yeah, let's just start with Truex here. Again, I want to reference Dover. He could look good in practice. I mean, we might see him drop as low as 8-1, maybe. I just don't think he's going to be. I don't think his car will be as good as the one he had at Darlington. And that's the only really blemish on his last couple of races. I mean, a third, and then he easily could have won that Darlington race, and then an 8th at Kansas, and obviously won at Dover. So his average running position in the last 4 races is actually the best in NASCAR. For the last 4. So he definitely has some speed coming in. He had a little bit of speed here last year. What worries me is he would really struggle at Phoenix earlier in the season. I think that the cars are much different than they were then. So, yep. And obviously it's not going to be like the exact same package. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. But at this point, all 3 of these guys, I don't see their prices moving. I would rather wait and, if I could get them at 8 or 9-1, knowing that they're going to be fast, I'd way rather do that. But, this is not a Hamlin type track. When you talk about the 11, he likes a place where he can serve his tires and then kind of wear people out over the long run. And also, if you make a mistake here, it's really going to hurt you. It is so hard to pass these guys that like to go to the rear, the Larsons and the Hamlins. They're going to have their work cut out for them if they do that late in the race or even early in the race. I don't think that, it's a super narrow pit road. I just think the guys are going to struggle if you make a mistake. So that's why I don't like Hamlin. I just think that if he makes, it's just not going to be easy to drive through the field like it has been at some of these other tracks like Charlotte, Darlington, Kansas. You were able to work your way back to the field. I don't think that's the case this week. Chris Bell, we finally saw speed out of him at Charlotte for the first time. I think he went up there and raced for the lead, and it was like, oh, okay, Chris Bell actually, at times during the race was the fastest car, and we haven't seen that out of him. So although he's had these really consistent finishes, we haven't seen that speed. So maybe they've figured out something in that 20 car, and we're going to find out this week. Again, I'll wait till after practice and qualifying.
It's been interesting because, you look at JGR and typically you think that all of those teammates would move in the same direction, but it really hasn't quite been the case. Martin Truex, to your point, quietly putting together good finishes. And if you back out the 31st at Darlington, where he definitely had a top 5 car, suddenly those numbers get even more pronounced, and he's put together quite a run, knowing that Talladega is what it is a super speedway, not exactly where Truex has done his best work during his very decorated career as a Cup Series driver. 2 other guys that are kind of in this same price range that I wanted to get your take on real quick. One, I'll openly admit I can't figure out to save my life, that being Ross Chastain. Back-to-back finishes now outside the top 20 after he had put together a pair of top 5 finishes at Kansas and Dover. Last 7 races, those are, however, his only 2 finishes inside the top 5. And a guy that you mentioned in terms of looking at his full body of work, raising some eyebrows there, being Tyler Reddick. 3 out of 4 races now inside the top 10 for the 45 car. 23XI in general starting to perform at a higher level the last few weeks. Bubba Wallace showing some of that same race-winning speed on a weekly basis. And when we talk about Tyler Reddick, had a strong finish at Phoenix, but Martinsville and Richmond, if we want to even come close to using those as comps, nowhere near the same type of efforts.
Yeah, and I even want to throw a little asterisk next to that Phoenix. He was able to take 4 tires, got the extra restart, and essentially is the guy that shoved Byron to the win. So although he did have a good run and a good finish, I think that it was a little bit manufactured towards the end of the race. But I'll tell you what, he's got some speed in his car, and 3 top 10s in the last 4 races. Man, I think that this is, maybe the part of the season where Reddick starts to pick it up a little bit, and you throw those 4, road course races. He's got to be licking his chops to really pick up some points. He's sitting, 7th in points right now. He already has a win, so I think it'll be. I think this is going to be a good little stretch for Tyler Reddick. I'm not opposed to that 16-1 price. Now, when it comes to Chastain, oh man, we just haven't seen that same guy since Darlington. What the hell happened in Charlotte? That was just not
He just
good.
Was out there riding around trying to log laps.
Not good.
He was never in contention in the mix. Trackhouse in general, a race that they would probably like to just as soon forget.
Yeah. So a track like this where it's really hard to pass usually favors really aggressive drivers. And we saw it last year. We saw Chastain get a little too aggressive and wrecking both the 11 and the 9. And it turned into kind of a dog and pony show there for a while with Denny trying to
run him down to the infield, baby.
So, but here's the thing. I wonder if this conversation that Justin Marks had, and after the comments from Rick Hendrick, does this really take that competitive edge, or the edge that maybe Chastain had on the field? Like, he was able to pass cars because he was willing to drive so aggressively. And if he has to just dial that back a little bit, does that take that car from being a top 5 car to maybe even outside the top 10 to top 12? So I'll be interested to see not how he looks in practice. I know how he's going to look in practice. I'm interested to see how he races, because I'll tell you what, if a lot of his success was his super aggressive driving and he has to tone that back, I think this one car could really struggle. Now, that's just my observation, and it'll be interesting to see what happens this week. But at a place where it's tough to pass, you have to be aggressive. And if he's going to be lifting when maybe he shouldn't be, just to drive with more etiquette, I think this one team could struggle a little bit.
Best of the rest in terms of other drivers that you feel could be very relevant in terms of the gambling picture this weekend. I mean, look, I was going to try and make a case for Chase Briscoe, knowing how fast he was last year here before he got himself into a little bit of trouble early on in stage 1. Not quite sure I want to find myself on or against the 14, knowing all of the underlying things that could be factoring into the camp, and if they're going to Napa Auto Parts or anywhere else to pick up stock equipment to try and put in their cars, I might be a little bit more concerned about it. Brad Keselowski, though, 3 top 10s in his last 5 races, caught up in a lot of nonsense last week at Charlotte. Don't feel his 19th place finish was indicative of exactly how he ran. It mirrored when he finished 19th at Kansas at the last mile and a half. But before that, 5th at Talladega, throw it away. 8th at Dover, 4th at Darlington. And Dover and Darlington probably a lot more similar to what we'll see here. So wasn't sure, other than those 2 guys, if there was anybody else that you wanted to at least mention briefly as we get close to waving the white flag on stage 3.
Well, the one I do want to mention, one driver, and not in a positive light, that'd be Kevin Harvick. A lot of people are looking at Harvick and said, oh, he was the fastest guy at Phoenix. Listen, Harvick was Harvicking at Phoenix. And what I mean is he was running a line that no one else could run. That line's not going to be available at this track. So I am not high on Kevin Harvick this week. If anything, I'd be looking to fade him at this point. I just don't see him qualifying super well. And I think that if you're taking some even money drivers against him, at this point in the week, you're probably getting the best of the number right now. I think that it'll only kind of move against him. But when it comes to, there's 2 other drivers, I really like Brad K this week. I think that if he can show some 1-lap speed, he can maintain his track position. They're willing to take some chances, leaving him out on older tires, and he's done extremely well when he's been put in that situation. And when it comes to strategy, just knowing that you have a driver that can just maintain his track position, even on older tires, that is so valuable, and especially at a place like this where it's going to be hot and slick, and there's going to be some guys hopefully getting loose, and these cars will be a little bit of a handful. But I really like Brad K this week. If he's just kind of running around in the top 5 to 7, who knows what happens if just a 2-tire stop or even stay out on old tires. I trust him to get the job done, even if he doesn't have the best stuff. So I like Brad. And then the other guy would be Bubba Wallace. I mean, man, his finishes have been really good, and he's shown some speed, and he's shown the ability to recover a little bit. And I tell you what, I think that, last 3 weeks, 4th, 5th, 4th, that's pretty good. Dover, 12th. I think Bubba in his current form is as fast as anybody outside of the 5 and the 24. So I do think that there might be some opportunities to get some good value on Bubba. I'm seeing right around 40 to 1. I don't know if there's any 50s available, but Bubba might be a guy, if he can qualify well, he'll stay up front, because just like the last year, Chase Briscoe obviously qualified on the pole, and Austin Cindric qualified well. Those guys were able to stay out there and lead laps. Same with Michael McDowell when he stayed out with older tires. He was able to lead laps and win a stage. So if, these guys that qualify well, I think it's going to be as important this week as it has been, this entire year. So those are the 2 guys that I'm actually looking to potentially maybe take some outrights or some flyers on at this point in the week.
I mean, look, Bubba's current form is better than Ross Chastain's, but the 2 drivers aren't priced anywhere close to one another on a week-in, week-out basis. So when we talk about inefficiency in the market, it's always fascinating to see how fast books adjust drivers up to try and create a little bit more action, or how quickly they'll bring drivers down based on their current form. And much like teams in college football or the NFL, if you're not out there winning, but you're being competitive, you can find ways to cover from an ATS standpoint. And I feel we're getting a very similar equivalent for Bubba Wallace, going out there, putting together finishes, not matched up against top tier drivers week in, week out. So some of those efforts are flying a little bit under the radar because he's not grabbing the checkered flag. So things to watch, no doubt about it, when you look at the race dynamics here, and so much will be determined in terms of what directions we elect to head when we see these cars unload over the weekend and figure out exactly who's got race-winning speed. You can follow Chris on Twitter at ChrisWormy15. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. As always, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Wormser, I mean, I'm not sure this is technically stage 4. This is more like victory lane since we're not at Charlotte again. But it is the best bet portion of the program, and you have maintained a hot hand. Other than when I gave you a respite, I picked a car that I think is still trying to finish in North Wilkesboro, and Joey Logano. What have you seen catch your eye early on in the week before we head out to the lovely Midwest and Madison, Illinois for the Enjoy Illinois 300?
Yeah, this is kind of an interesting one. I'm looking at, some of these outright prices, and you see a guy like Chastain priced at like 12 to 14 to 1, and you see a guy like Bubba priced at 40 to 1. But then you look at their top 10 prices, and they're both minus 139. Like, you can just tell that the pools of money are very different when it comes to those two particular wagers. And I can't take a guy like Bubba minus 139 at a 40 to 1 price to win. So I'm going to stick with my boy Brad Keselowski. He's plus 140 to finish inside the top 10. I think that he's as fast of a Ford as, there's been outside of maybe Ryan Blaney. And, he's also 9 to 1 to be the top Ford. I think that that's a pretty good price as well. For those of you looking to just be a Brad K fan, but my official bet will be Brad Keselowski plus 140 top 10.
Look at that. The 6-car and RFK really getting their act together after a season last year that we knew was going to have some growing pains. The 6 and the 17 inching closer. And if you look at his teammate in that stable, Chris Buescher quietly as well, over his last 5 races, has 4 finishes inside the top 10. And maybe Buescher's a guy that we'll talk a little bit more about next weekend when we head to Sonoma, knowing what he was able to put in the books. All right, my friend, I think we've done enough damage for a racetrack that I am very curious to watch unfold. Let's hope we have comers and goers, that it's not all just a strategy race like we saw last weekend. Not overly optimistic, but maybe that's why the change in aero package that we'll see here for the 1.5 mile tracks will give us a little bit of an opportunity, even if the tire doesn't suggest all of that. Any final words of wisdom, nuggets you'd like to share, or anything else you'd like to get off your chest before we give everybody a full week's hiatus from us?
Well, I just think if you're going to live bet, make sure that,
you have that Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi is very important, but also just make sure you're paying attention to strategy. And if, let's just say with 100 to go, someone has 4 fresh tires, or maybe even 80 to go, someone has 4 fresh tires, just look for them to be the people or the drivers that maybe take a risk and maybe only take 2 tires on that next stop. So I really think you're going to have to get out there and, kind of be in the top 2 rows on the final restart if you're going to win this race. I just can't see someone driving up from 8th place on, 4 tires to win this race, unless we see something completely different this year, which, I don't think is going to happen. I do think it's just going to be really hard to pass, and therefore make sure you just stay up front. And really easy for me to say, here you go. You know what, guys? I should have said that to Rodney Childers when I was at SHR. Hey, Rodney, if I could give you some advice, it'd be really good to just stay up front for most of the race and see how that works. But no, just pay attention to the strategy. Those guys that have, that have taken 4 tires and they're coming down on the last pit stop, expect on the previous stop, they took 4 tires. Expect them to be the ones that can gamble a little bit. If someone took 2 tires the previous stop, they're not going to have as much flexibility as some of these other guys. So just keep that in mind when you're live betting. I think that track position wins this race.
Every now and again, you need some outside the box thinker in every race shop. So if you're looking to try and hire someone that's going to provide a unique perspective on things, make sure you take Chris's resume. He wants drivers and teams to stay up front, and he wants them to adhere to the rules and make sure they're using the parts issued by NASCAR to avoid stiff penalties. So Correct. Is there anything else that you'd like to offer up if this becomes your de facto resume to try and get you on a race team in any capacity?
No, I think that, as someone that bets on this, the best advice I can give is, just bet on the faster cars.
Hey, you know what? It's that kind of advice that people have come to expect from the Stay Green podcast.
Yep.
There is no doubt about it. If you bet on the faster cars more often than not, you'll find
Yep.
yourself profitable at the end of a race weekend. Something that I haven't learned working with you for the last 8 to 10 years. I'm going to have to try and change my habits and look to amend my process overall. But best of luck to all you guys and girls out there. Appreciate your continued support for Stay Green. As always, if you guys have any questions, feel free to tweet at Chris and myself using the hashtag Stay Green. Chris also does an outstanding job on race day with the pre-race poll, where he's got a lot more information at his disposal. Like we said, check back the website on Sunday. If we have practice, we will have additional wager or wagers that we can share with all of you guys. We just don't want to give you bets for the sake of making them if we're not going to be backing them with our hard-earned money like some of the content providers that are out there. So best of luck this weekend. And most importantly, with a Brad K Top 10 ticket in hand, we'll see you at the window.